less imperial with each passing day, and we're going to talk about that today. It's a real pleasure to welcome all of you here. Those of you joining online, of course, come by in person sometime. But this is a really important conversation that we're embarking on, and it's such a pleasure every day to work with Dr. Lindsay Burke and all of our colleagues in education. They are the absolute best education reformers on planet Earth. And yes, I have an obligation as the president of Heritage to say that, but the advantage too, the nice thing too, is that it also happens to be true. And so thank you, Lindsay, for everything that you do, and of course, for the aspiration that you and all of us at Heritage have, and that is to revitalize self-governance, not through policy primarily, but through great institutions. And we have some great institutions who are present here today, the leaders of them present today. I happen to know two of the institutions really well, having led one and connected to another personally, and I've just gotten to know the third institution really well, College of the Ozarks. We're glad, Brad, that you're here and grateful for everything that you're doing. This is the upshot. The future is bright. We're reclaiming institutions. We're reclaiming the culture broadly. We're certainly reclaiming policy, but we have some work to do. And as we like to say at Heritage, we read reality truthfully. And reality, particularly since October 7th, has been very ugly when we see what so many students and faculty, and unfortunately, administrators who are not nearly as good as those who are here today, perpetrating about anti-Semitism, about the utter absence of truth with a capital T on our campuses. Those of us who are lifelong educators know that this is the rotten fruit that has been fertilized year after year by the radical left, which has successfully marched through almost all of our institutions. And so hats off to the leaders of these institutions here today. Hats off to many of you in the audience I know who play a role in the reform, not just of the institutions, but of culture more broadly. But what's different now isn't just that we have a growing number of institutions led by great men and women, but that we have an administration that is also helping to lead the way. That's the thing that's been missing in education reform is the confluence of these different channels of reform that lead us to a moment when we can sit here today, and while we read reality truthfully that the last years of American higher education have been pretty bad, that we actually can aspire to a future that's bright because of healthy institutions and because we have a president, vice president, secretary of education, and as we will soon hear from, associates of those great leaders in the administration who are leading the way. One of them is Dr. Jonathan Podluzhny, one of my new friends in education reform. Doctor, thanks for being here. Thanks for everything you're doing as the Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy and Programs at the U.S. Department of Education. You're originally from Alberta, Canada, which I understand has not become the 51st state. We'll leave that for another conversation. Previously, Vice President of Academic Affairs at the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, great organization. Before that, Dr. Podluzhny was an associate professor of political science and the political science program coordinator at Morehead State University, where he taught for 10 years and served as the elected faculty regent from 2017 to 2019. So he's been able to look at this issue from a lot of perspectives. Dr. Podluzhny received his PhD in political science at Boston College and holds both BA and MA degrees in political science from the University of Alberta. Thank you all for being here, but please join me in welcoming Dr. Podluzhny to the stage.
Well, thank you, Dr. Roberts. It's a real privilege to be here. Today's panel is called Reclaiming the Culture of American Higher Education, and you couldn't ask for a better group of panelists on this subject, so it's a real pleasure to kick things off. American confidence in higher education, as everyone knows, is low today, and it's low in part because the typical campus culture is so far from the American culture. We see the headlines every day, all the ways DEI imposes a viewpoint monoculture, the relentless assault on free speech at our elite institutions, faculty who tell survey researchers that they fear to teach honestly, either for fear of being canceled or for formal sanctions. We could go on, but I promise to keep my remarks to about 5 minutes. Lindsay has asked me to say a few words about the administration's first 75 days and its vision for higher education. Before turning to that, a few words about the purposes of higher education in American society, which should, after all, guide all thinking about policy, seem to be in order. So let's begin by acknowledging that our universities are among the most important institutions in our society, and I think for at least 3 reasons. First, they are responsible for helping to prepare young people to lead fulfilling lives. That's an important trust. That means teaching young people to think carefully, to write, to communicate well. It also means preparing them for family-sustaining employment in the labor market that we have. Second, they're responsible for truth-seeking and advancing learning and science. This benefits individuals who learn to love learning for the rest of their lives, and it benefits society by advancing learning and powering economic growth. Universities should also be the repositories of our civilizational inheritance. They should teach graduates to understand the American democracy to help improve it, and they should keep alive Western civilization. In a healthy higher education sector, we would have a diversity of institutions representing a diversity of institutional missions. Some laser-focused on preparing students for a rewarding career efficiently and at low cost. Others focused on the natural sciences and cutting-edge research. Still others focused on a traditional liberal arts education and all the intellectual and character benefits that can impart. If the higher education sector was doing these things, we wouldn't need this panel today. So why aren't they? The first part of the answer is that many parts of many universities have been hijacked by an ideology that doesn't value any of this. Learning requires rigor. In fact, we know from the research about how college affects students that more time with books and professors is associated with skills mastery and cognitive gain. I used to ask my students if they'd gain anything from going to the gym if they didn't do any of the work. Would you go to the gym and just stand there and expect to build muscle? Of course not. DEI is anti-rigor. It seeks equity, and that means fewer tests, lower expectations, less reading. Truth-seeking also requires deliberation in an environment where there's viewpoint diversity. Our postmodern ideologies deny that there's a truth to seek, all while working to impose a viewpoint monoculture. As for perpetuating our civilizational inheritance, the ideological forces that have taken over universities are instead using them to tear down the foundations of Western civilization. These forces, as we know, are anti-family, anti-religious, anti-capitalist, and anti-truth. So how did we get here? It's a long, complicated story, but the federal government did play a role, right? Let me focus on 2 of the more serious failings of federal policy. For years, ED's grant programs, its guidance documents, and its approach to civil rights enforcement have pushed universities to adopt these pernicious ideologies. The last administration wrote DEI into virtually every grant. 4 of its 6 grant priorities were related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. The last administration also used Title IX and Title VI enforcement and all the associated guidance to push universities to adopt policies and practices that infuse DEI into virtually all aspects of institutional life. How we fund higher education also plays a role. In the US, we lock virtually our entire investment in post-secondary education into traditional 2- and 4-year sectors to the neglect of apprenticeship and work-based learning. Our accountability systems are also badly broken. It's almost impossible to start a new university today due largely because of our accreditation system, and universities that underperform are allowed to go on underperforming with few consequences. Universities with dismal graduation rates, even in the single digits, maintain accreditation, and there are no consequences for programs that saddle graduates with enormous debts into the 6 figures without enabling them to earn enough to repay it. So what can the Department of Education do? First, we need a complete reorientation of civil rights enforcement. Instead of asking universities to do more DEI in response to reports of anti-Semitism, for example, we should be laser-focused on protecting students from discrimination and harassment. This includes Jewish students at elite institutions, of course. It includes female athletes who should not be subject to the indignity of being forced to change in the presence of naked men. And it includes looking at university practices that rely on illegal race preferences and race stereotypes. I think that reorientation is already well underway. Second, ed and granting agencies should reorient federal investments away from ideology back to the advancement of learning and teaching excellence. Here too, I think the work is underway. Third, we have to work toward a new vision of how we fund post-secondary education and how we hold universities accountable. This is a bigger conversation, one our friends on the Hill have already been leading for a while. Critical reform principles include a careful look at how we do quality assurance, new thinking about accountability systems so that universities that are charging 6 figures for a low return on investment credential also have some skin in the game. And finally, we should think about ways to build new incentives to align program portfolios with the needs of the marketplace. In conclusion, I think we want a variety of excellent institutions that understand their missions differently, but in ways that complement each other. Nothing would do more to help rebuild public confidence in higher education. The panel Heritage has arranged today showcases distinguished university presidents who have built excellent institutions, and it's a real privilege to turn the conversation over to those doing the hard work in the field. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Pidluchny. Really appreciate you being here today and appreciate all of the work that the administration has done to reclaim the culture of higher education, which right now has much more than a PR problem. I'm Lindsay Burke. I direct the Center for Education Policy at the Heritage Foundation. It's my pleasure to moderate a panel today with some outstanding college presidents. Higher education is long overdue for a cultural course correction. And during the first 100 days of the Trump administration's second term, that correction has begun apace. From combating anti-Semitism infecting elite colleges and universities to safeguarding free speech on college campus, the higher education sector has been put on notice. At the same time, although a cultural crisis and poor ROI have undermined much of the value proposition of higher education today, there are bright spots. Innovative institutions such as Grand Canyon University, Wyoming Catholic College, Christendom College, and the College of the Ozarks. And I'm delighted to lead a conversation with their visionary presidents today. Dr. Brad Johnson serves as the 17th president of College of the Ozarks. Johnson came to College of the Ozarks with a robust background in higher education, having served as the interim president of Southwest Baptist University and the vice president for institutional advancement. Prior to his time at SBU, Johnson held positions at McMurray University, Hardin-Simmons University, and Howard Payne University, all in Texas. And please make sure you get some apple butter from College of the Ozarks before you leave today. It's delicious. President Brian Mueller joined Grand Canyon University in 2008 to usher in a new era for the institution. Taking the successes he experienced as a teacher and coach at the high school and small college level, as well as his 22 years of experience at the Apollo Group, which is the parent company of the University of Phoenix, Mr. Mueller transformed GCU from a financially struggling university into one that is a driving force in higher education today. Dr. George Harn was named Christendom College's fourth president in 2024. A widely respected and accomplished scholar of music history and the liberal arts, Harn earned his PhD from Princeton University. He previously served as the executive dean of the School of Arts and Sciences for the University of St. Thomas in Houston and as president of Magdalen College of the Liberal Arts. Finally, Professor Kyle Washut was named Wyoming Catholic College's fourth president in 2023. Washut is a Wyoming native, has been with Wyoming Catholic since its inception. Growing up in Casper, Wyoming, you've got the most interesting bio, I have to say. Sorry, apologies to our other great presidents, but growing up in Casper, Wyoming, he worked in a nuclear missile silo and in coal mines during his teenage years, got his AA then in political science and a second in Spanish from Casper College, and then he studied under two of Wyoming Catholic College's eventual founders, Dr. Robert Carlson and Father Robert Cook, and began his journey toward Wyoming Catholic, wait for it, by serving as the dishwasher at the annual Wyoming School for Catholic Thought, where the idea for the college was first proposed. Such an interesting story. Please join me in welcoming our college presidents to the stage. So, Dr. Johnson, I'll start with you. College of the Ozarks, if you're not aware, is known as Hard Work U. How you attract students in this day and age, I will never know. But it's known as Hard Work U, where students are required to work 15 hours per week during the school year and then two 40-hour work weeks during their breaks. They have to work two 40-hour work weeks. So how have you seen this requirement actually shape graduates? And just tell us a little bit more about the design and the model of the program.
Great. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you so much. And it's good to see all of you here today. Kyle, you would have been a perfect fit for College of the Ozarks. I mean, and having all your experiences there. But Yes, students do work 560 hours each academic year, and in exchange, they get to go tuition free at the college. And we don't participate in the student loan program, so everyone graduates debt free. No tuition, no debt, but they work. Hard Work U is the moniker that we have had since 1973. The Wall Street Journal actually came up with that phrase and branded us as Hard Work U. The college begins every student experience with something called Character Camp. And it's a week-long experience. New student orientation, you might be familiar with that term, but those students go through an experience that is really unlike any other. And they learn about our American values, and they learn about our faith, and they learn how to work hard and how to show up on time. And all of those things are built into that Character Camp experience, and then beginning into their academic experience as well. You know, I think about how it has shaped students over the years. One of our graduates, Christian Zoll, she is very accomplished lady, lives out in California now. But when she came to College of the Ozarks, came from a very impoverished family, didn't have any resources at all. Came to the college, did well academically, began to distinguish herself, and when she graduated, was able to get an internship at the White House. And she talks about what she has learned at the college, the value of work. But at the White House, having such a unique experience, she said, you know, I was sitting around the conference room table and having just used a Sharpie on my heels to polish them up. When colleagues around the table had purchased their suits and everything from Neiman Marcus, she said, I shopped at Kohl's and I thought I was doing real well. And she said, I realized sitting around that table that I was at the same table of influence as those that had resources. And I think those are the things that happen at College of the Ozarks, building the character and hard work. So it's a pleasure to be a part of the mission.
Thank you. Dr. Mueller, many families now are looking for something different, looking for universities that don't compromise in their values. And in fact, I'll put a little plug out for Heritage's College Index that we are now producing annually that helps families navigate the choices that are out there to find a college that can align with their values. But given the model, and if you could talk a little bit about GCU's model, how do you maintain your unique identity in what is a pretty hyper-politicized environment, to put it nicely? How do you navigate that complex educational landscape? And if you could also talk a bit about your model.
Good question, thank you, and thank you for having us here. You know, if you think back 200 years ago with the beginnings of higher education, everything was taught from a biblical worldview perspective. The creation, fall, redemption, restoration story in the Bible was at the foundation of what people learned, what young people learned, regardless of whether they were going into the natural sciences, into engineering, into business. And over the years, it's completely flipped. And so when we went to GCU 16 years ago, we were wondering how to create a university, a Christian university, that would teach from that worldview perspective, but would be affordable to all socioeconomic classes of Americans. That was the problem, was making it affordable. And what we thought was, if we would understand the needs of students across the life spectrum, and we were very creative in how we would deliver according to who the student was and what was the nature of what they need to learn, we could build growing student bodies across the age spectrum, leveraging a common infrastructure, and we could make it affordable. And so when you think about what we're doing now, we have a traditional campus. We started with 900 students. Today we have 25,000 students. They're coming from all over the country. They're students that are graduating from high school, going to college. They have 3 or 4 years to spend on a college campus. They want to make friends, build a network, learn about life and work. But there's a whole another group of people that are 34 and 35 years old that want to go back to college. They can't go back as an 18-year-old. And we've now grown to 10 colleges and 350 programs, and about 250 can be delivered totally online. And so we have 99,000 students studying from a biblical world perspective in all those programs that are attending online. There's a third group of students out there that can't go back as an 18-year-old, but what they need to learn can't be learned totally online. And so we've built 45 smaller campuses across the country, and we have a goal to have 80 of them across the country where students are learning things like nursing, the nurse practitioner program, cybersecurity, where some of what they learn can be learned online, but a lot of it has to be learned in a brick and mortar laboratory. We have a fourth platform that's really interesting because it's tied to our engineering program, and it's about bringing back the trades. Not every student needs 4 years of college. We need electricians, machinists, we need technicians in our chip factory. There's a fifth platform, I won't go into the detail of it, but those 5 platforms have growing student bodies leveraging a common infrastructure, which has allowed us not to raise tuition in 16 years. And so our average student now takes out less debt than the average state university student. And because we centralize the curriculum, everybody's learning whatever academic area they choose from a Christian worldview perspective. We have a doctrinal statement, we have a set of ethical position statements, and so we're very clear about what we're going to teach in our classroom. We believe the Bible teaches that life begins at conception. We believe that marriage is between a man and a woman. So if you come to university, if you don't believe those things, you understand that we're going to teach from that perspective. We're not a church, we're a university. But part of the story of GCU is that we built this $2 billion campus with our own cash reserves. It's a 21st ranked campus in the country now, classrooms, laboratories, residence halls, and all that goes with that. And we've done that using the free market system. And so we become the largest private university in the country in an inner city. And that's a big part of the university's story. 12 years ago, we decided to do something that the government can't do, which is do something about poverty. We believe God put us in this place at this time, not just to teach students and to grow the university, but to do something about the 42 different languages and the immigrants that live in our neighborhood. We put together a 5-point plan that was based upon, number 1, create jobs, number 2, build safety, number 3, restore homes, number 4, give opportunities to students in our inner city neighborhood, mainly of whom are immigrants, and then we have a city serve thing, and then we've got another 100 ministries that are going on in our neighborhood on an everyday basis by our students. And so the idea that Jesus would come back today, I think he'd come to a neighborhood like ours, because I think he cares deeply about people who are suffering, and a Christian university who cares deeply about people who are suffering and reaching out, lifting them, I think neutralizes and so interestingly enough, obviously we get a lot of support from the right, but in Arizona we also get support from the left, because there are people who don't believe what we believe about the Bible and about Jesus and about salvation and all that, but they care about people that are hurting, and that draws them to us in a way that kind of neutralizes this political divide that's making our country crazy.
That's great. And you've got a good basketball team to boot.
Tournament for one of the last 5 years, and I'm not telling you to go place a bet on GCU next year, but we're going to have a good team.
I had the Lopes going far in my NCAA bracket, but yeah.
Sorry we let you down this year, but not next year.
Not at all. Well, Dr. Harn, thank you for being here today. The liberal arts are often dismissed as impractical, but we believe that they are quintessential for forming wise, virtuous leaders. So how do you defend in this day and age where people want their kids to go to college to learn to code or do engineering? How do you defend your deep-rooted commitment to the liberal arts?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. It's a timely one. And I think I appreciate the diversity of this panel because we're all approaching these larger questions from different perspectives. I think fundamentally, we all want our children to be free. We want to be free ourselves. And at the very root of liberal education is that commitment to freedom. And I think there's also a commitment to leadership. I mean, we all use leadership in different ways. We lead our lives. So as individuals, we lead our lives. We lead our families. We lead our mediating institutions. We lead at local levels, state levels, federal levels. We all have a role of leadership. We have different styles, different approaches. But that link between liberal education and leadership, at whatever level is very historical, it's classical, it's been tested, it's been tried. It's not just for the elite. That's one of the beautiful things about the United States is that we have made liberal education something that's available to anyone who's willing to show up to the gym and work out. Showing up to the gym is not going to do it, but you do have to be willing to put in the time. But it's a pathway to freedom. And I think freedom and flourishing go hand in hand as well. And I think we all want our children to flourish. So I think part of the approach is to think about liberal education properly and the liberal arts properly as these keys to ultimately human flourishing. What we do is we place the study of the classical liberal arts within a context. I think of it as think of it in terms of a verse from the book of Ecclesiastes. A three-stranded cord is not easily broken. And for us, the education we offer to our students is there are three strands. One is that commitment to liberal education, which we think of more in terms of disciplines. But there's also a commitment to mentoring students, a one-on-one personal formation. We want our students to become adults, become fully adults while they're undergraduates, and make that transition. But there's also a spiritual core. There are fundamental commitments, there are metaphysical commitments that we have as an institution. And I appreciate how straightforward you are in terms of offering what you're saying to the people who come in. Because I think most universities and colleges have fundamental commitments, but they're afraid to state them publicly. And parents send their kids there not knowing what they're sending them into. But we're very direct. We're forming students spiritually. We're forming students in terms of their personal maturity, but then also intellectually. And the liberal arts, I think, cut across all of those. The last thing I would say about what we're doing in terms of the liberal arts is internally we talk a lot about Charlemagne and Alcuin and the school at Aachen. And I won't go into all the historical details here, but essentially what we come to think of as Christian civilization in the West was born out of a school that united spiritual renewal with liberal education, liberal arts. They taught people about the truths of the gospel and of Christianity while also teaching them to read, while also teaching them the fundamentals of rhetoric. So our idea is that these things go hand in hand. And when your goal is to educate the whole person, that's just the natural thing you do.
That's great, thank you. Dr. Washut, Wyoming Catholic College's founding was bold, as was the founding of all of the institutions here, but launching a Catholic college rooted in the great books and the natural world in particular was bold. So what were those founding convictions that gave rise to this vision, and how do they guide you today? And talk a little, too, about just the general structure of the school.
Sure. So when we started Wyoming Catholic College, we're less than 20 years old, so we're the youngest college here on the panel. And we started it in a state which has more cows than people. And we did that because we were convicted about the need to go into the frontier for renewing the Republic. Now, that's true for the history of Christianity, but it's also true for the history of the United States in particular. The going out into the wilderness, going into the frontier is a place of renewal and rejuvenation for our Republic and for our faith. What really would be a foundational text for us is probably the foundational text about education for Western civilization, Plato's Republic. And there Plato reflects on, has Socrates ask the question of what do we need to do to educate the guardians, the people who are going to preserve and defend the Republic, the city, the values of the culture we have. And there he highlights three important steps that get you ready for doing the philosophy and the rhetoric and the actual training of the mind. And he says the three steps are, first, a stepping back from things that are distracting in the culture or things within the culture that prevent one from having a full educational immersion. Two, the need to cultivate, once you've stepped back from that, the need to cultivate the imagination, to tell stories, to sing songs, to be immersed in a poetic, imitative way of loving the Republic and its values. And then third, the need to cultivate the body, to make people who are tough, who are gritty enough to embody the kind of thing we need to be a preserver and a guardian of the Republic. So that foundational idea inspired Wyoming Catholic College concretely in this way. So we went out to the frontier. We're in a small mountain town at just under 7,000 feet. And we send all of our students out for a 3-week backpacking trip at the beginning of their freshman year. That 3-week backpacking trip is led by the seniors in the program. They go out, they do a 3-week backpacking trip, they learn the leadership skills necessary to do that. There are more people with PhDs in the United States than people who have spent 3 consecutive weeks in the outdoors. After that, they then commit to an additional 7 weeks of outdoor formation and a semester of horsemanship. And we do that because we're taking Plato very seriously. The need to cultivate the body, the need to cultivate grit in terms of forming leaders. And they reflect on it, and they work on communication, they work on reflecting every day on what were the decisions we made, how did we respond to things like inclement weather or dropped backpacks or bears eating the food source or whatever the case may be. And they communicate and they work and they adapt, and that kind of training protocol is in fact the leadership that formed the Mountain Division of the military that was then extended to leadership, education, and formation for the terms of the Guardians of the Republic. When they come back to campus, our commitment to what is the thing that is most distracting from education, we're convinced it's the smartphone. And so we ask all of our students to fast from their smartphone the entire time they're students at Wyoming Catholic College. There's no internet in the dorms, and they don't have their smartphone on them. That allows for a focus on intense reading, intense reflection, intense community formation, where they're doing the kind of education and the liberal arts that we think is necessary for leading and forming. So that's the structure of Wyoming Catholic College.
I'm sorry, can you say that again? There's no internet in the dorms?
No internet in the dorms, and they give up their smartphones, not because we think that these are inherently evil things that you can never use, but because we're convinced that in order to go back as leaders, as guardians, as those who know how to use these instruments, you need to fast from them, not to be a slave of them, so that you can come out with the leadership skills that you've had, whether that's coordinating helicopter rescues or wilderness adventures, while reading philosophy, while studying political science, etc., to then go back as a free man or a free woman to be able to lead.
I also didn't have internet in the dorm, but that's because I'm old, not because I went to...
Right, yeah, I tell people, it's not Eden, it's the 90s, right, yeah. So.
That's amazing, thank you. Back to College of the Ozarks. Do you see the college as part of a broader movement to reclaim higher education for traditional values? And what does that mean for you? What does it look like?
You know, I think that's, we do see that as an important element of what we do, impacting our culture. Number one, we work really diligently to safeguard that culture within our own institution. I think it has to start there by doing things that are faithful to your mission and faithful to our faith. And so I think about some of the things that we do internally to safeguard those things. All of our faculty, as they come in, they are invited to campus after a rigorous interview process. But in their first year, they have to produce a paper about how they integrate their faith within their academic discipline. And then they get to present that paper at the end of their first year to their colleagues, and everybody gets to have some feedback into that. After, if they are successful in that endeavor, then they get to go on and in their employment there, and then the 6th year, they have to repeat that process and come back and tell how they are integrating their faith. Those are things that we try to do internally that are really important to us, one of the things. I think it's also important as we look out to the broader culture to be able to take a stand in places that are important and that can shape the values of our country. And I think about some of the things that we've done to stand in places where it wasn't really popular, and where we're standing against things like transgender or mixed gender residence halls, those types of things that we have taken a stand on. And it's a both and. It's safeguarding your culture from within, which involves hiring and all of those types of things, but then coming back and standing strong in the broader culture as well.
I imagine it's the case both at College of the Ozarks and at Wyoming Catholic that students just don't have time to protest if they're working all the time. That's great, thank you. And thank you for bringing up the faculty piece of this. I'd love for each of you to touch on that if you could as well. Dr. Mueller, Grand Canyon University has undergone really a remarkable transformation since its founding in 1949, especially given its online presence, which is massive. How has that growth impacted the university? In particular, how do you integrate, you mentioned the biblical worldview, that and just moral clarity across this very large and diverse student body, especially given the online environment? If you could touch on that, and then maybe integrate what Dr. Johnson said a moment ago about how do you ensure this with faculty, and what does faculty hiring look like for you?
You know, one of the things that if we've got 25,000 students on our campus, it's going to grow to 50,000. We have 99,000 students online. We have 7,000 students in these hybrid programs. And then we've got in our trade program, that's growing as well, a couple thousand students. And so we centrally create the curriculum. And we've grown from 3 colleges to 10 colleges. We have over now 350 academic programs. And so as we centrally create that curriculum, we have taken the Christian worldview perspective and inserted it across all colleges, across all programs, and in almost all courses. And so every student, whether you're going on ground on our campus or whether you're going online or in one of our hybrid campuses, you're learning what you're learning, whether it's the natural sciences, engineering, business, et cetera. You're learning about how those academic areas are informed by the Christian worldview perspective, the biblical narrative. And so it's the centralized curriculum development process that allows us to do this. But the faculty are hugely important, hugely important. We have 10 colleges, we have 10 deans, and those people are really the protectors of who the faculty are. And that is extremely important. Every one of our faculty knows that they're going to come to the university and they're going to teach from a Christian worldview perspective. And they have to be comfortable with that, and we provide a lot of training around that, so that they can get better and better whether they're teaching literature or whether they're teaching engineering, they need to understand how the biblical worldview impacts that academic area. And so it's not as hard as you would think. This tremendous growth, and people are thinking, boy, how do you keep up from a faculty standpoint? The truth is that it's just like our parents. We've got students that are coming from all 50 states, and they want to talk to me, and most often what they're going to say to me is, thank goodness that there's a place I can send my son or daughter to college where what we've taught them for 18 years isn't going to be ridiculed, and they'll come back 4 years later not even knowing who they are. That is, people are so grateful for that. I'll tell one quick story. After the last basketball game, because you mentioned basketball, after our last basketball home game, a woman came up to me and said, I want to talk to you for a second, and she started crying. And she said, my daughter's been a cheerleader at your institution for 4 years. And 4 years ago when she came, she was really lost. She had bad friends, she was doing harmful things, and we were unbelievably concerned about her. She started to attend chapel services. She started to attend Bible studies. She was impacted by your curriculum. And I can tell you, she's going to graduate in a couple months. She's getting married. She's a totally different person. That was so impactful for me, given what our first speaker said, because the opposite is happening everywhere. And people say, why are you scaling like you're scaling? Because the country needs it. There are so many families have children like that who, when they come to an institution and people say, how do you create that culture? I can't create that culture. But when the Holy Spirit is alive and well on your campus, those things are going to happen. Yes, the faculty are absolutely key, but that culture has to be completely surrounded. I mean, it's got to be part of your campus and every part of what you do.
That's great, thank you. So Christendom is one of a handful, and I mean a handful, 19, I think, colleges across the country that don't take any federal aid whatsoever, along with Wyoming Catholic College. How do you do it? And what drove that decision? How has it helped you safeguard your mission? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Well, I think it was the wisdom of the founders, and they decided to put an in-house student loan program in place, and so that's grown as the college has grown, and so we have the facility within the institution to be able to help families that can't quite cover the full cost. And so again, you go back to the founding, someone had that insight, that inspiration to do it at that right time. It's very difficult for institutions who are already up and running and have been in existence for some time to make that change, though I know quite a few are working on that project, and I'm hopeful that can come about for them. I think another piece of this is keeping costs under control. I mean, faculty are at the very center of what we do. And so being very realistic about, this isn't a country club for 18 to 22-year-olds. This is an educational institution, and this is why we exist. And having everyone on mission for that purpose. As I said earlier, I think every college or university has fundamental purposes, fundamental values, and commitments. And to be upfront about that, I think is critical. A lot of institutions, I think, pretend to be sort of neutral. I'm thinking of McIntyre's, different traditions. You sort of have the Aristotelian, Thomistic tradition. You've got sort of the Enlightenment tradition. Then you've got this sort of Nietzschean knowledge is power. I'm oversimplifying grossly, but you've got these different traditions, and I think a lot of schools pretend that they're neutral, but they're not. Once the kids and students are in there and they're in the middle of it, they realize, oh, this is really about this political agenda. And so we're not afraid to be upfront. So the truth in advertising, I think, is important. Just a couple small things. Our faculty, they know all this before they're hired, and before they get very far in the process, our faculty take an oath of fidelity at the beginning of each academic year. I'm there, I lead them in this. It's part of the opening mass. And we commit to doing our best to embody and at least publicly standing to the traditional teachings of the church. And that's a critical piece. And within each contract, there's a commitment from the faculty to publicly uphold the teachings of the church. So again, truth in advertising. And the parents know this. And by this way, I should say the donors also love the fact that we don't take federal funds. So we're very, very clear to our donors, to our faculty, and even to our students. We just had a scholarship competition weekend. And I must have heard it, I don't know how many times over the course of the weekend. Christendom is not for everyone. This is who we are. This is what we do. We'd love to have you join us if this is what you're being called to do. But if it's not, there are other places. So being truthful to all those who are involved, being very clear about our fundamental commitments. It attracts donors, it attracts families. It's a wonderful place to be.
It's a virtuous cycle.
Yeah.
That's great. So back to Wyoming Catholic College for a second. The curriculum and culture seem intentionally demanding, intentionally so. How do you attract, do they know what they're getting into, the students? I guess that's my question. And how do you convince them to embrace this sacrifice in a world today that really encourages them to eschew it?
Yeah, so I think the students definitely know what they're getting into. Not since the Oregon Trail if people accidentally stuck around in Wyoming. It takes some effort to get there. And then they come and they seek it out. And the reason they seek it out is because we're very aware, even with, like, for example, the great growth happening at Grand Canyon or in some of these new institutions, the number of institutions that are actually committed to preserving the Republic, preserving our way of life, are a drop in the bucket in the midst of the giant state institutions and the legacy higher ed institutions that are out there. And so the students who come out to Wyoming are looking for a challenge. They want an elite educational program. They want a demanding leadership outdoor program because they know they have a responsibility to be some of the few who come out there and then take part in protecting and preserving this thing that we have. They know they're part of the initial shockwave of troops that we need, and that's why they come for it. If they wanted the country club phenomenon, they wouldn't come to Wyoming, right? They come to Wyoming because they want to be some of that few elite set of leaders who have this incredible formation to be able to do that.
And we'll do a quick lightning round. I want to open it up to the audience, but really quick answers, lightning round on this. But can you talk about I know there's no typical, but your typical graduate. Each of you have such a different model. What's the typical Ozarks graduate doing when they leave? And if everybody could just say a few
Sure. Well, there are a variety of places where they go on to graduate school, or they'll go into the world of work. I would say that College of the Ozarks graduates are so in demand for the jobs that are in our region. They have superintendents of schools that they say, you know, if I see that it's a College of the Ozarks student, it's a hire for me.
And you were saying your nursing program is
Nursing
large.
program, engineering, agriculture, all of those fields are graduates. Number one, they know how to work, they know how to show up on time, and they're well educated, hardworking, and patriotic, by the way. And that's what our employers in the region really strive for.
We have grown now to 22 advisory boards, over 800 companies on those advisory boards because companies want access to our graduates. And what we've tried to do at GCU is say every one of our students that graduates from every one of our 10 programs, whether it's natural sciences or medicine or engineering or business, is going into a sacred vocation. For too many years, the church has said if you really want to serve Jesus, you have to give up your passion and you have to be a full-time pastor. We need pastors and we need full-time Christian teachers, but we've given up influence in so many spheres of society because we haven't graduated kids that are going into electrical engineering believing they're going into a ministry, or going into medicine believing they're going into a ministry. We have to regain influence in those very important spheres of our culture, and the only way to do that is to create graduates who go into those spheres with their Christian worldview perspective and impact them, not just from the medical standpoint, but also from their Christian, from a Christian perspective. And so our typical graduate is that kind of person.
That's great.
I'd say every one of our graduates is a leader in some form. So we produce leaders. After the incredible core formation and liberal arts formation, we basically connect them with our career office, our career programs, which have a network of opportunities around the country in different fields. And that combination of incredible academic, personal, spiritual formation, plus the opportunities that that career office develops, they go everywhere. They're leading in the public sphere. We have a lot of entrepreneurs. They're leading in schools. Pretty much any part of American society you can find a Christian graduate leading either on stage in the spotlight or just off stage in a more quiet and indirect way. But we produce leaders.
I think, so we're young, and so trying to talk about what are the general characteristics, I think we could highlight three things that characterize Wyoming Catholic College graduate. One of the things we've realized in starting Wyoming Catholic College is you need to form a network well beyond the college, a network for student loans, a network of industry, a network of other institutions to create a movement. So our students come out committed to the need to form intentional relationships in a sort of Tocquevillian model. Right? Form small associations and form a network of small associations. So our students come out focused on trying to build networks from the ground up. Our students come out with a sense of a desire for service. They know they've received an elite education and they know that there's a burden on them to share that. Very often they'll do 2 years of some kind of deliberate sharing work, whether that's teaching in a small startup classical school, whether that's leading outdoor programs. We lead another 1,000 people a year through our outdoor programming who aren't students, whether it's students volunteering to do that, whether it's going out and doing mission work for 2 years in various ways. We'll see them do some intentional service work for about 2 years after they graduate. And then thirdly, we'll see them emerge as creative entrepreneurs in whatever they're going to go into.
I love how all of your answers were about the character of your graduates and less about whether they're making six figures when they leave the door. I'm sure that follows, but I'd be honored to have my son attend any of your institutions. So thank you for your insights. Would love to open it up to the audience. If you can just raise your hand and then wait for the microphone to come around. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have a two-part question, if I may. One, the title of the presentation today, Reclaiming the Culture of Higher Education, kind of implies that the culture has been lost. And I'm thinking our side is it a case where our side has been Rip Van Winkle for the last 50 years and allowed the left to take over? And I guess my second question would be, as commendable as your institutions are, have we basically ceded the ground for most of what is traditional higher education. In other words, Princeton or Dartmouth or whatever is not represented here. So are we looking at just alternatives, or is there an effort underway to actually reclaim the broader institution?
Great question. Thank you. Whoever wants to field it.
I would say it's something that there is a movement out there, and College of the Ozarks is part of a larger network of Christian colleges across the nation that are attempting to be faithful and to change the world for Christ. The Council of Christian Colleges and Universities, the president here is Dr. David Hogue, sitting there at the table with you. The group of colleges there that are working to remain faithful in what they're doing and reclaiming the education in our nation.
I'll just jump in on two notes, it seems to me. One, reclaiming a little over 100 years ago, there was a radical remaking of higher ed that happened where generous benefactors came in and started a new wave of institutions. The University of Chicago emerges out of this. A number of these schools come out as a response to saying the old model didn't work, we're going to build new colleges. Now, as a result of the building of the new colleges, it actually transformed the existing legacy institutions. So at least in part, it seems to me the American approach to helping reform higher education begins with creating compelling small institutions to put pressure on the other ones. Secondarily, I think one of the big things we need to talk about is what we're doing financially for reforming those schools, right? We're talking about schools that have an endowment that is the size of Iceland's GDP, right? What kind of pressure can we do? Well, that requires some creative thinking about what the pricing models are, what we do for student loans, how we break out of various things in that regard. That's not going to put immediate pressure on a school with $1 billion endowment. But but those schools are not affordable anyway. So creating affordable options while experimenting with these institutions, I think does help us get a foothold in. I don't think it's the sole solution, but it does seem a very American response to start by forming intentional institutions to put pressure on the larger legacy ones.
What the media and higher ed and Hollywood has tried to convince most of America that what is being taught at 95% of our universities is what Americans want. And that is absolutely untrue. The majority of Americans don't want what's being taught from a worldview perspective in most of these institutions. It wants what we're teaching in our institutions. We have to figure out a way to make it affordable. So we have to figure out a way to scale it and make it affordable. And if that happens, what's going to happen in the next 10 years is really going to shock people. Because if the only options to go to college are to go to those institutions, people are going to quit going. And they've stopped going now. There's fewer high school graduates. There are, as a percentage, fewer going to college. But if we come up with financial models that make it affordable, there's going to be no stopping what we can do in the next 10 years. I mean, people ask me if we've reached an apex. We absolutely haven't. They're coming from all 50 states, and we really can't stop the growth now. We just have to figure out a way to teach the growth, because the demand in our country is through the roof for what we have.
Yeah, and I would just say that we're conceding nothing. Absolutely nothing is going to be conceded. A school like ours, our motto is restoring all things in Christ, and that word "all" keeps me up at night. That's a tall order. So I think the key is, in some ways, credentialing and cracking the credentialing code, taking the most talented students, nurturing them, helping them to get the credentials that will then be able to allow them to take positions of leadership on the administrative side as well as on the academic side. And sometimes this happens by bringing them up through the faculty, sometimes it happens by bringing them through the administrative side, and then also a lot of these institutions are influenced by parallel institutions. There are some of what we consider to be the elite institutions of this country have sort of parallel structures alongside them that are grounding some of their best students in reality, the reality of the human person, the reality of the physical universe and metaphysical universe. So I think there are ways to do this. So I think a lot of thought is being put into this. There is no intention, though we are at our own unique institutions, we're giving up nothing at this point. Too much has been given to those institutions. There's too much at stake.
Since you mentioned it, could you say 90 seconds on your credentialing efforts?
Sure. I mean, I think on the academic side, we need people with PhDs whose heads are screwed on straight, who can go into these disciplines. Some disciplines are almost completely lost, and it will take years and years and years to recover. Some are less astray. There are certain kinds of degree programs, the EDD, for example, which on the administrative side of the house is extremely important. We are in the process of launching an EDD. Rooted in a traditional human anthropology and a traditional understanding of what education is as formation, not an unpoliticized approach. Those graduates will be able to go out and lead both primary schools, secondary schools, but also higher education institutions. Very often the schools of education at universities are some of the most corrupt, lost parts of the institution. We have to begin by retaking those parts of the universities. So I think we're being very, very intentional about our approach. We can't do it all at once, but that's where we're headed.
Yes, ma'am, in the middle here, Meg.
I'm Meg Kilgannon with Family Research Council, and there's a lot of talk in the culture about men opting out of college and women opting into college. And could you tell us what is the situation like at your school in terms of the breakdown of male students and female students, but then also just speak more generally to the demographics of each of your colleges? Thanks.
I know that we definitely have more women at College of the Ozarks than we do men, but that number has started to equalize. One of the things that we're working on right now is a plan to integrate the trades. You know, at Hard Work U, we have a lot of there's students working in our construction department, and so we are working on plans to credential plumbers, credential carpenters, and credential people that work in the hospitality industry as well. So there are a lot of things that we're doing that people can graduate with a bachelor's degree, but then also have a trade or a skill that they can take with them as well. And I think that is attractive with many young men in particular. So.
One of the problems, and you're bringing up a very good subject, because most of us are 60% or so female and 40% or so male, and that is throughout higher education. A lot of it has to do with access for minority populations. We don't have any affirmative action programs. We don't have any DEI programs, but we've made the tuition affordable. We haven't raised tuition in 17 years to all socioeconomic classes of Americans. So guess what happens? We have 28% Hispanic students, 8% African American students, over 40% students of color. And it's a lot is the minority males, particularly African American and Hispanic, are not going to college in the same numbers. And so if we make it affordable and we create a broad base of programs, and we finish in college should not be 4, 5, or 6 years. It should be 3 years at maximum. And if we can get students involved in internships as early as their sophomore year, get their hands on things, we're going to be able to attract as many males as we do females and fix that problem. It's not a government mandate through DEI that'll fix the problem. It never is. It's smart business models that make things affordable, and all of a sudden you have what the world wants to see, an inclusion of everybody.
Yeah, we have slightly more females than males, but I think we're going to actually see a swing this year, closer to 50-50. I think part of it, our approach is we have athletics for men and women. We have a championship women's basketball team, but we also have rugby. They've won national championships. So there's an emphasis on educating the whole person. You know, we do take Plato very seriously in terms of educating the spirited part of the soul. And so that's an important part of what we do. So I think having those opportunities, but it is a challenge. I think a lot of the young men feel the pressure. There's a strange pressure now to have everything figured out and their lives completely worked out, and then to be at 6 figures within 3 years after they graduate. And they don't see how a 4-year liberal arts education is going to fit into that. So it's really on us to articulate a vision and a pathway for what that can look like. And it's working. They're responding. But you have to make more effort than maybe you had to make 5 or 10 years ago. But it's a story that in some ways tells itself once you get into build a culture around it.
We're at basically 50-50. I think that the men come for the hiking and the women come for the horses, perhaps. But roughly 50-50. More broadly, demographic trends, we are seeing mostly middle class enrollees from our students. Many of them who want to get married and have families, which is one of the things that maybe is a dissuader for men joining higher ed if they're thinking I'm going to be saddled by massive debt and not be able to do that. So we're seeing people that want to get married, want to have families, want to then place themselves in fulfilling careers in various ways, and are generally very smart, very driven, but want to opt out of the traditional paths for the very smart and the very driven because they know we need to build basically a new ecosystem for higher ed.
That's great. Well, we've accomplished something here today that I'm confident has never happened before, which is a panel of academics concluding exactly on time. So thank you for that. And I'll just ask one last question, which is, do you wake up every morning and think you're lucky stars you're not the president of Columbia? I imagine that's a tough job right now. But please join me in thanking our panelists.